Hey there friends, Jeremy Siskind here. I'm the author of this book called Playing Solo Jazz Piano. And today I want to talk about a device that a lot of musicians use, but maybe most importantly one of my favorite pianists, Bill Evans, which is implying a 3/8 note group, or kind of a 3/4, 3/8, 6/8 meter when you're in 4/4 using a device called a Hemiola. And like I said, just about every jazz musician does this to some degree. It's kind of in the DNA of jazz. Implying 3s over 4s, it goes back to ragtime. In fact, it's what makes ragtime, that comes from this term ragged time. It's what makes ragged time feel so ragged. So even, those E flats up here, those are happening in groups of 3, or even in that next section of the Maple Leaf Rag. It's all groups of 3 in the right hand. And so just about any great jazz musician is going to be using this to some degree. But Bill Evans was such a master of mixing, implying, superimposing other meters over the standard 4/4 meter that I just wanted to kind of pay homage to him in this video. So let's dive in, and I want to show you some different ways that you can use this device, practice it, learn to improvise, and I'll even show you a few licks that you can use. So if you see it right at the top of the page here, number 1, this is kind of the most simplified version of what I'm talking about. So we're just going to keep on using dotted quarter notes. And dotted quarter notes are worth 3/8 notes. So even though the meter overall is 4/4, here I'll add that just in case. I know some people who are classical minded are like, I don't know what time signature I'm in, or I just kind of assume we're in 4/4. So these 3s are not going to fit evenly into the 4/4 measure, which creates what we call a hemiola, which is where you have a primary rhythm that doesn't fit evenly into the overall rhythm. So if here's 1, 2, 3, 4. I would do is I would just practice a scale and maybe try to keep, I'm keeping the timing of my feet. All my students tell me that they can actually hear my feet when I do this, so I hope that you can on the YouTube video as well. Or you can try practicing it against different types of rhythms in the left hand. So I was just holding whole notes that time, but I could do half notes. And then eventually it would be great if you could get to the point where you could kind of improvise. You could start just in a single key. Or you could play your favorite tune, Autumn Leaves. I hope you can hear that the rhythm's going what we call over the bar line, which means that it's not kind of lining back up every measure or every phrase with your 1. It's just kind of continuing on its own path. And so this doesn't necessarily have to be just a melodic device. You could also use the same rhythm in the left hand. So again, I'll write in, this is in 4/4. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. That in the left hand, and then see if you can improvise in 8th notes against it. So even at my level, it takes a lot of focus to do this well. And then play a tune, Autumn Leaves, 1, 2, 3, 4. To some points where the chord's not going to exactly line up with where you're playing the chord in the left hand, right? Because by definition, these hemiolas don't line up. So generally, I'm going to try to anticipate the next chord. So for example, I'll show you on this beat 4, if I had a new chord starting right here in the next measure, I'd probably play it early. And definitely, if I start a chord on the and of 4, I'm going to start it just a little bit earlier. Now, you can play around with that. You can play around with what does it sound like to delay the chord? What does it sound like to play a little bit of maybe a half-step lead-in, a side step, or something like that. But in general, the best thing that I do is usually to delay the chord. So same thing, you could try it with a bass line. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Counting, snapping, and playing is tricky. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, can't do it. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. There we go. Yeah, that's a mental workout. So then can you improvise? 1, 2, 3, 4. What's great about these hemiolas is that it provides such a rhythmic motor that you don't have to do as much with your right hand. You don't have to improvise, anything brilliant because you've got this kind of rhythmic motor going on. And then if you've watched some of my other videos, you might know that one of the first ways I like to start students playing solo piano is doing what I call a left-hand shuttle, which is going back and forth between a bass and a chord. And so you could practice that with the hemiola too. So I definitely recommend writing this kind of thing out first because it does get confusing. Okay, where am I on the chord? Because it's not going to be as simple as you're playing one bass, one chord, and then you move on to the next chord, right? Here, you're going to play one bass, one chord, and then you're going to be on beat 4 of the measure. So it takes some planning, and you might want to write it out so that you can figure out how things are going to land. Okay, so I'm moving on to number 4. And so now what we're talking about is grouping. And so we're still focusing on this dotted quarter note kind of hemiola. But now we're filling it in with 2 eighth notes. And so what we're going to end up with is consistent eighth notes. And you might think that's not interesting rhythmically. But because we're grouping things in 3, so you can see I'm going a triad here, a triad here, a triad here, a triad here, there, we still have that feeling of the hemiola, even though we're not necessarily doing a rhythm that is itself a hemiola. So, okay. And I often tell students this is one of the biggest reasons why shape is so important in jazz. And by shape, I mean how a line leaps or where it changes direction. Shape is so important because it implies rhythm. So, that's just consistent lot of rhythmic vitality to that line because it has this 3 against 4 feel. And you could even, if you wanted to add an octave above the notes that I have a tenuto next to, then that could even kind of secure that feeling a bit more. And in number 5, I'm showing you a very common lick that's used. I've heard Lester Young use it, Stan Getz use it. So here we're doing 3 half steps together and then leaping. 3 half steps together, leaping. Notice that you could do that in triplets, but then you don't get this kind of rhythmic hemiola. You don't get this feeling because it would be... It's much less rhythmically interesting to put a group of 3 notes into a rhythmic container that kind of contains a grouping of 3. So you could practice, improvising. Can I improvise in groups of 3? This is one thing to do. But what other patterns could you come up with? It could be, right? Or so those are just steps, or I'm doing a leap and then repeating a note. There's all kinds of things that you can do. That's just kind of an opening exercise to help you think about grouping. Now, it doesn't have to be just consistent 8th notes. Here in number 6, I've given you 2 other rhythms that fit into that feel. So I want to point you over on the right side of the page here. I show you this rhythm. It's hard to see sometimes on the page because of the way that the beaming works, but it's an 8th, 2 16ths, and an 8th. And this is something that Bill Evans definitely uses himself. So if I'm doing quarter notes, it basically flips whether I start it right on the beat or I start it off the beat. Play it straight like that, or you can play it with more of a swing, and I would have a hard time notating this, to be honest. But you can definitely hear Bill Evans doing that all the time. And actually, I'm gonna skip down. I will return, but I want to skip down to number 7 here. There's kind of a great blues lick that you'll hear people like Oscar Peterson and Gene Harris doing, where you go. Same rhythm. I can play it straighter. You're basically repeating the same 3 8th note pattern. Right, so it creates a real feeling of rhythmic tension besides the harmonic tension. That's going on if you're playing the blues. Now, let's go back up to the second example here, which is a very simple rhythm. It's just a quarter note alternating with an 8th. So 1, 2, 3. So that's how it would sound in 3/8, but it gets very interesting if you put it in 4/4. One of my favorite pianists, Benny Green, uses this in a solo on Virgo from his album These Are Soulful Days. And he goes, something like that. But these are things that people are actually using out there in the real world. Really, really good pianists. Now, it can also be fun to take these rhythms and divide them between the hands. So we could go. And you'll hear people like Bill Evans doing this all the time. So it could be 2 in the right, 1 in the left, or it could be 2 in the left, 1 in the right. Especially if you're playing solo piano, it's kind of fun to think. You can create these really interesting rhythmic arcs using a hemiola. And you can have these kind of handoffs between the hands. So there, the two hands are kind of doing an interrelated pattern, and I'll probably make a video of things like this. Basically, I'm using a modal voicing, but I'm dividing it up between the two hands. So instead of just playing this all as one chord, I'm dividing it up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. These kinds of things just create this great rhythmic momentum. So, if all of that, you heard all of that and you're like, oh, that's easy. First of all, good for you. You're crushing it. It's not easy for me. But a couple other things that you could do to kind of create the same sense of rhythmic vitality and momentum. One is, if you start using triplets, or if you're in a meter based in 3, like a 6/8 or a 3/4, by putting in groupings of 2 or 4, now you're creating kind of the reverse effect of that hemiola. You're still, instead of putting 3 into 4, you're putting 4 into 3. So if I'm playing 1, 2, 3, 4, right, these are triplets. I could play 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So I'm playing groups of 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Or it could even just be groups of 2. You might say, how could I ever use this? I use it all the time when I'm playing. 1, 2, 3, 2. Oh, total fail. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I just transitioned from groups of 4 in triplets to groups of 3 in eighth notes. So kind of almost a reversing of the hemiolas. So there's a lot of experimentation to do within those triplets. Or you could start doing kind of more interesting grouping patterns like 5s. So I'm back to eighth notes. But now I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Right, so that can get very interesting. If I'm playing a blues, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could use 5 like that. There's all kinds of really interesting applications of making groups of 5 as well. So, got a lot to work on there. Just to review from the beginning, start just melodically, just with dotted quarter notes. See if you can feel you're going to tap into these two different rhythms. One is the dotted quarters, one is your underlying meter. Then you can use it in the left hand in the comping or in the bass. Don't forget, you're going to have to kind of anticipate or delay some of the chords as you do that. You can practice going back and forth between the bass and the left hand in a hemiola. And then I want you to think about grouping. So, make an easy rhythm like consistent eighths or just alternating a quarter and an eighth. But show by the shape of the line that you're grouping them in an interesting meter. You can experiment by using these hemiolas between the hands, and then see about mixing up the rhythms by using groups of 2 or 4 as you're playing triplets, or if you're playing in 3/4 or 6/8. Or you can also experiment with groupings of 5. Usually that's divided into a 3 and a 2, just to make things easy. All right, everybody. So as always, I always appreciate it when people check out the book. This is my baby, right? Playing solo jazz piano, best purchased at jeremysiskind.com, so that you don't give half your money to Jeff Bezos. I want that money, please. I'll see y'all soon. Thanks for your subscriptions, for your likes, and your comments. Bye-bye.